The restaurant glimmered under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, casting a warm golden light across the polished marble floors. Each table was adorned with pristine white linens, a single flickering candle, and a fresh red rose that added a touch of romance to the air. The sounds of glasses clinking and quiet conversations harmonized with the soft melody of a piano in the corner. Outside, the faint crash of waves against the Charleston shoreline added to the restaurant's charm, making it the perfect destination for an anniversary celebration. At the center of it all sat David Montgomery and his wife, Irene. David, a man in his early 40s, exuded a commanding presence with his tailored navy suit and perfectly groomed appearance. His sharp features and confident demeanor caught the attention of passing diners, though he seemed unfazed by the attention. Across the table, Irene shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her emerald green dress complementing her auburn hair, but doing little to mask the unease in her expression. Her fingers absent-mindedly brushed against the pearl necklace David had gifted her years ago, a nervous habit she had developed without realizing it. "This is lovely," Irene said softly, her voice barely audible over the ambient hum of the room. "But I feel like someone is watching us." She glanced around, her eyes flickering from table to table, then to the grand windows overlooking the ocean. David let out a light chuckle, lifting his glass of champagne. "Darling, you're imagining things," he said smoothly, his voice laced with reassurance. "Everyone here is too busy with their own evening to notice us. Besides," he added with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "you're stunning tonight. It's no wonder if someone glanced your way." Irene forced a smile and picked up her own glass, hesitating for just a moment before taking a sip. Her hand trembled slightly as she set it down, the sparkle in her eyes dulled by an underlying sense of unease. She had wanted to decline David's suggestion for this dinner, citing her exhaustion, but he had insisted. Now, sitting in the lavish restaurant, surrounded by strangers, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Nearby, Lisa Carter moved between tables with practiced grace, balancing plates with ease while maintaining an air of attentiveness. As a waitress at the prestigious establishment, she had grown accustomed to catering to Charleston's elite. But tonight, her focus seemed sharper, her gaze often lingering on David and Irene. Something about the way Irene hesitated before sipping her drink caught Lisa's attention. The subtle tremor in her hands, the way she nervously touched her necklace, it all set off quiet alarms in Lisa's mind. She couldn't explain why, but she felt compelled to observe them more closely. "Everything all right here?" Lisa asked, pausing by their table with a polite smile. Her voice was calm and professional, but her sharp eyes flickered between the couple. "Yes, thank you," David replied with a touch of impatience, dismissing her with a quick glance. Irene, however, met Lisa's gaze, her lips parting as though she wanted to say something. Before she could speak, David reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "Let's enjoy the evening," he said gently, though there was an unmistakable firmness in his tone. "This night is about us." Irene nodded reluctantly, lowering her gaze as Lisa offered a brief smile and moved on to the next table. The interaction left Lisa with a nagging sense that something was amiss, though she couldn't put her finger on it. As Lisa returned to the kitchen to retrieve the next order, her mind remained on the couple at the corner table. Years of working in the service industry had sharpened her instincts, and tonight, those instincts told her to pay attention. Lisa's instincts proved hard to ignore. As she weaved through the bustling kitchen, her thoughts lingered on Irene's hesitant demeanor and the way her gaze flickered nervously around the room. There was something fragile about her, a quiet plea for help that Lisa couldn't quite shake. Even as she busied herself with other tasks, her peripheral vision kept drifting toward their table. At the corner table, David continued his seamless display of charm. He raised his glass, offering a toast. "To us," he said, his voice smooth and steady. "Another year of building something extraordinary together." Irene forced a smile and clinked her glass against his, the faint chime lost in the symphony of the restaurant. She brought the champagne to her lips, but only sipped lightly before setting the glass down again. Her fingers brushed her necklace, an action that hadn't escaped David's notice. His brow twitched slightly, but he quickly masked it with a warm expression. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his tone gentle yet edged with subtle tension. "You've been so distant lately, Irene. It's our anniversary. I was hoping we could celebrate without distractions." "I'm sorry," Irene murmured, her voice faint. She avoided his gaze, her hands folding neatly in her lap. "It's not that. I'm just tired, I suppose." David's jaw tightened briefly, but he relaxed and leaned back in his chair. "Let's not let paranoia ruin our evening," he said, his smile returning. "This night is meant to be perfect." Irene nodded, though her expression remained strained. She reached for her water glass, her hand trembling slightly as she lifted it to her lips. Lisa noticed the movement from across the room and frowned. Something was definitely wrong. The subtle unease she had sensed earlier had now grown into full-blown concern. As Lisa approached their table again, the tension between the couple was almost palpable. Irene seemed to shrink under David's commanding presence, her shoulders hunched ever so slightly as though bracing for a reprimand. Lisa placed a fresh breadbasket on their table, her eyes briefly catching Irene's. "Please let me know if there's anything I can get you," Lisa said, her voice kind but deliberate. For a moment, she thought she saw Irene's lips part, as if she wanted to speak, but David's sharp, almost imperceptible glance silenced her. Irene nodded politely, offering a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Everything is fine," David said, his tone firm, cutting off any chance for further conversation. Lisa hesitated for a fraction of a second, then turned and walked away, her mind racing. Whatever was happening at that table wasn't normal. Minutes later, as Lisa cleared a nearby table, she noticed Irene hesitating again before taking another sip of champagne. Her hand trembled more visibly this time, and her complexion seemed pale under the warm light of the chandeliers. Lisa's concern deepened, and she mentally prepared to act if necessary. Something was wrong, and she wasn't going to ignore it. Irene set her glass down, swallowing hard. Her breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling unevenly. David reached across the table, his expression tightening. "Irene, what's the matter?" he asked, though his voice lacked genuine alarm. I don't feel well," Irene managed, her voice shaky. "It feels strange." She pressed her hand to her chest, her fingers trembling as she clutched the fabric of her dress. David's brows furrowed as he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You're overreacting. It's just the champagne on an empty stomach. Relax." But Irene's breathing became more erratic, and beads of sweat formed on her brow. Her gaze darted around the room, disoriented, before landing briefly on Lisa, who stood frozen a few tables away, watching with wide eyes. "Excuse me," Lisa said abruptly, stepping closer to their table. "Is everything all right here?" David turned sharply, his polished demeanor faltering for the first time. "Irene is fine," he said curtly, his tone clipped. "She just needs a moment to compose herself." Lisa wasn't convinced. Irene's trembling hands and pale complexion told a different story. As Irene swayed slightly in her seat, Lisa instinctively stepped forward. "I'll call for help," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the rising tension. "No!" David snapped, his tone unnaturally harsh. He quickly softened, forcing a strained smile. "There's no need. I'll take care of her." But before he could say anything more, Irene let out a weak gasp, her body lurching forward as her head slumped against the table. The room fell silent for a moment, the sound of her collapse breaking through the hum of the restaurant. Then chaos erupted. Lisa's instincts took over as she rushed to Irene's side, calling for someone to alert the paramedics. The carefully curated elegance of the restaurant crumbled into confusion, and Lisa knew this was only the beginning of the night's unraveling truths. The restaurant descended into chaos as Irene collapsed against the table, her shallow breaths barely audible amid the sudden flurry of activity. Patrons craned their necks to see what had happened, their whispers merging into a cacophony of alarm. Lisa knelt beside Irene, her pulse racing as she took in the woman's pallor and trembling hands. Her instincts screamed that this wasn't a simple fainting spell. "Someone call 911!" Lisa called out, her voice cutting through the noise. She looked up to see a man in a sharp suit approaching quickly. Dr. Henry Walker, a regular customer and a local physician. "I'm a doctor," he said firmly, kneeling beside Lisa. He pressed 2 fingers to Irene's wrist, his face tightening. Her pulse is weak and erratic. How long has she been like this? "It just happened," Lisa said, her voice steady despite the panic tightening her chest. "She's been acting off all evening, hesitant, pale. I noticed her trembling earlier." Dr. Walker nodded, his focus entirely on Irene. He gently tilted her head back, checking her airway. "She's breathing, but barely," he murmured. Looking up at Lisa, he asked, "Did she eat or drink anything unusual tonight?" Lisa glanced at the table, her gaze locking onto the half-empty glass of champagne. "She was drinking that," she said, pointing, "but she hesitated every time she took a sip. I thought it was strange." Dr. Walker's eyes narrowed as he studied the glass, but before he could respond, David appeared at Lisa's side, his face a mask of controlled panic. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "You're not even sure what's wrong with her. Don't make assumptions." Lisa stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. "I'm trying to help. She needs immediate medical attention." David's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't argue further. Instead, he crouched beside Irene, gently brushing her hair from her face. "Stay with me, Irene," he whispered, his tone soft but tense. "You're going to be fine." A server rushed over with a phone, announcing that an ambulance was on its way. Dr. Walker quickly issued instructions to clear the surrounding area, giving the paramedics space to work when they arrived. Lisa stepped back, her heart pounding as she watched Irene's shallow breaths. Despite David's reassuring words, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. Moments later, the paramedics arrived, their brisk movements filling the space with a sense of urgency. They assessed Irene swiftly, attaching monitors to check her vitals. One of them, a woman with a calm but commanding presence, turned to Dr. Walker. "What do we know so far?" she asked. "Severe weakness, erratic pulse, shallow breathing," Dr. Walker reported. "It could be a reaction to something she consumed, but we need confirmation." The paramedic nodded and turned her attention to David. "Do you know if she has any allergies? Has she taken any medication?" David hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking his head. "No, nothing like that. She was fine earlier today." Lisa, standing nearby, noticed the brief pause and felt a chill run down her spine. Something wasn't adding up. As the paramedics prepared to transport Irene, Lisa found her gaze drawn back to the champagne glass on the table. Her instincts told her that whatever was wrong with Irene, the answer lay there. Lisa's eyes stayed fixed on the champagne glass, her gut churning with unease. She moved closer to the table, her fingers hesitating before she picked it up carefully by the stem. The faint bubbles that lingered in the liquid seemed mocking now, their innocent appearance hiding something far more sinister, or so she suspected. "Excuse me," she said, addressing the paramedic in charge. She was drinking this. I noticed she hesitated before taking sips, like she knew something wasn't right. The paramedic glanced at the glass, then back at Lisa, her brow furrowing. "Did she say anything to you about feeling unwell before this happened?" Lisa shook her head. "No, but she looked uneasy. I've seen enough people in distress to know when something's off. Her body language, it wasn't just fatigue." The paramedic nodded, taking the glass from Lisa. "We'll analyze this. It could provide a clue." Nearby, David hovered over Irene as the paramedics prepared to move her onto a stretcher. His face was etched with a mix of worry and frustration, though Lisa couldn't tell which emotion was genuine. His earlier sharpness toward her replayed in her mind, and she couldn't shake the suspicion that his concern seemed calculated. "She's going to be fine," David said, his voice steady yet hollow. He looked up at the paramedic. "When will she regain consciousness?" The paramedic glanced at her monitor, her face neutral but serious. "She's stable for now, but her vitals are still weak. Once we get her to the hospital, we'll have a better idea." Lisa couldn't stand still. Something about the entire scene gnawed at her, a persistent feeling that Irene's collapse wasn't random. She glanced toward the kitchen, where Maria Bennett, the head chef, was anxiously watching from the doorway. Lisa made her way over, needing answers. "Maria," Lisa began, keeping her voice low, "do you know where that champagne came from? Was it part of the regular stock?" Maria's face tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "No, actually. That bottle wasn't from our usual supply. Mr. Montgomery brought it himself, said it was something special for their anniversary." Lisa's stomach sank. "He brought it himself?" she repeated. "Was anyone else involved in opening or handling it?" Maria shook her head. "No, he made sure of that. He handed it to me directly and watched while I chilled it. I thought it was odd, but—" She trailed off, glancing toward the commotion near the table. "Why? Do you think there's something wrong with it?" "I don't know yet," Lisa admitted, "but it feels wrong, and Irene's condition doesn't make sense otherwise." Maria's brow furrowed and she leaned closer. "Be careful, Lisa. If you're onto something, it might not be safe to push too hard. He's influential." Lisa nodded, her jaw tightening. She understood the risk, but she also knew she couldn't ignore what she'd observed. Her instincts hadn't failed her yet. The paramedics wheeled Irene out of the restaurant as David followed closely behind, barking orders into his phone. Lisa lingered at the entrance, her eyes following them until the ambulance disappeared into the night. Around her, the restaurant slowly resumed its usual rhythm, but she couldn't shake the weight of what had just unfolded. As Lisa turned back to the table, she noticed the champagne bottle still sitting in its ice bucket, untouched. She hesitated, then carefully lifted it, examining the seal. It was faint, but there, a subtle tear that didn't seem like it belonged. Lisa's mind raced as she set the bottle back down. She didn't know the full story yet, but one thing was clear. Irene's collapse wasn't just an accident, and Lisa wasn't going to let it go without finding the truth. Lisa couldn't let it rest. The events of the evening replayed in her mind, each detail sharpening the sense that Irene's collapse was no coincidence. She stood by the table, staring at the champagne bottle and glass like they held a secret waiting to be uncovered. The faint tear on the bottle's seal felt deliberate, an anomaly in an otherwise pristine setting. Her thoughts were interrupted by Maria, who had quietly approached her. "What are you going to do?" the chef asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The room was calming down, but the tension between them lingered like a storm cloud. Lisa glanced at Maria, then back at the bottle. "I don't know yet," she admitted. But I can't ignore this. Something isn't right. Maria hesitated, then nodded. I'll help however I can, she said. I don't like this either. Lisa appreciated the solidarity, but knew she had to tread carefully. David Montgomery wasn't just another customer. His reputation as a wealthy, influential businessman preceded him, and she doubted he'd welcome questions about his behavior. Yet, Lisa couldn't ignore what her instincts told her. Irene was in danger, and the answers were likely closer than anyone realized. Lisa retrieved her phone and quickly snapped photos of the bottle and glass, capturing every detail that seemed out of place. As she did, she noticed faint smudges on the neck of the bottle, as though it had been handled more than once. Her stomach churned at the thought. If someone had tampered with it, the question wasn't just how, it was why. Across the room, David re-entered the restaurant. His usual air of confidence seemed frayed, his sharp gaze scanning the room before landing on Lisa. He strode toward her, his movements purposeful and quick. "Excuse me," he said, his tone polite but cold. "What exactly are you doing?" Lisa met his gaze, keeping her expression neutral. "I was just cleaning up," she replied smoothly, gesturing toward the table. "The paramedics took Irene's glass, but I thought it might help to keep the rest of the setting intact in case anyone needed to reference it." David's eyes flickered to the champagne bottle, then back to Lisa. For a moment, his mask of composure slipped, revealing something darker, a flicker of frustration, perhaps even fear. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "That won't be necessary," he said, his voice tightening. "I appreciate your concern, but my wife's condition is a private matter." Lisa nodded slowly, though her mind raced. "Of course," she said, stepping back slightly. "I hope she's all right." David didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached for the champagne bottle, lifting it from the ice bucket with practiced ease. "Thank you for your help tonight," he said curtly before turning and walking away, the bottle in his hand. Lisa's stomach dropped. He was taking the evidence, at least that's how she saw it. Whatever trace of proof might have been left in the bottle would now be beyond reach. She felt her frustration rising, but there was nothing she could do without drawing attention to herself. Maria touched Lisa's arm gently. "Let it go for now," she said, her tone cautious. "If you push too hard, you'll only make him more defensive." Lisa nodded reluctantly, but her determination only grew stronger. If David thought he could sweep this under the rug, he was sorely mistaken. She just needed to find another angle. Lisa watched as David exited the restaurant, the champagne bottle clutched tightly in his hand. The image burned in her mind, filling her with a sense of urgency. She needed to act fast. David's demeanor wasn't just defensive, it was calculated, as though he was working to cover his tracks. Whatever had happened to Irene, Lisa felt certain it wasn't an accident. Maria's voice broke her concentration. "Lisa," she whispered, "you need to be careful. He's not someone you can just accuse without evidence." "I know," Lisa replied, her voice steady but determined. "But I can't just let this go. If something happens to Irene, and I could have done something to stop it." She trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. The weight of inaction was too heavy to bear. Maria hesitated before speaking again. "If you're serious about this, we need to be smart. There might be other ways to figure out what's going on." Lisa nodded, her mind already racing through possibilities. "The kitchen," she said suddenly. "Was the champagne stored there before he brought it out?" Maria frowned. "Briefly. He handed it to me directly when they arrived and asked for it to be chilled. I put it in the fridge for a short time before the waitstaff took it to the table. Then it's worth a look," Lisa said. She turned toward the kitchen, her steps quick but cautious. She didn't want to draw unnecessary attention, but every moment felt critical. Once inside, Lisa moved to the fridge where the champagne had been stored. She opened it carefully, scanning the shelves. "Do you remember exactly where it was placed?" she asked Maria, who had followed her. Maria pointed to a corner of the shelf. "Here, it didn't sit long, maybe 10 minutes before it was served." Lisa studied the space closely. It looked unremarkable at first glance, but a faint, sticky residue on the shelf caught her eye. She grabbed a paper towel, dabbing it lightly over the spot. The substance was clear and odorless, but it left a slight sheen on her fingertips. "What is that?" Maria asked, leaning in. "I don't know," Lisa admitted. "But it doesn't belong here." She wrapped the paper towel carefully and tucked it into a plastic bag. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Her attention shifted to a logbook on the counter, a list of supplies, orders, and special requests handled by the kitchen staff. Flipping through it quickly, Lisa found an entry from earlier in the evening. David's name was there, listed next to a notation about the champagne he had brought. Beside it was an initial, a signature of acknowledgement. "That's mine," Maria said, pointing to the initials. "I signed it when he handed me the bottle." Lisa studied the logbook, noting the meticulous details. It wasn't definitive proof, but it created a timeline, one she hoped could corroborate her suspicions later. She snapped a quick photo of the page with her phone. Maria glanced over her shoulder, her expression wary. "Do you really think this is enough to figure out what's going on?" Lisa tucked her phone back into her pocket and looked at Maria. "I don't know," she admitted, "but it's a piece of the puzzle. I just need to figure out how it fits." They left the kitchen together, Lisa's thoughts churning. She felt the weight of the night pressing down on her, but she also felt a flicker of resolve. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. David might think he had control of the situation, but Lisa was determined to find the truth, and she wasn't going to stop until she did. As she stepped back into the dining area, the hum of the restaurant felt almost surreal, like the calm before a storm. The next steps weren't clear yet, but one thing was certain: the unraveling had only just begun. Lisa sat at a small corner table in the break room, her phone resting in front of her as she stared at the photo of the logbook. The faint, sticky residue she had collected earlier sat in a sealed plastic bag on the table beside her. The restaurant's kitchen was still bustling, but the distant clatter of dishes and muffled chatter only added to her sense of urgency. Something about this night felt bigger than it appeared, and the nagging feeling in her gut refused to quiet down. Her thoughts drifted back to Irene. The image of her pale face, her body trembling before collapsing, replayed in Lisa's mind. She couldn't shake the sense that whatever had happened was intentional. And David's reaction, calculated, measured, only deepened her suspicions. The man had an air of control that bordered on chilling. Maria entered the break room quietly, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. She set one down in front of Lisa before pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "You're still thinking about it, aren't you?" Maria asked, her voice soft but knowing. Lisa nodded, wrapping her hands around the mug. "I can't let it go. Something isn't right, Maria. David's behavior tonight, it felt off. Too perfect, too rehearsed." Maria sighed, glancing toward the doorway as though expecting someone to barge in. "Irene didn't look well the moment she walked in. I noticed it too, but I thought maybe it was just exhaustion or stress. Now, though, I don't know. It feels like there's more to it." Lisa took a sip of tea, her thoughts churning. "I took photos of the logbook and collected that residue from the fridge," she said, nodding toward the plastic bag. "It's not much, but it's something. I just need to figure out where to go from here." Maria hesitated before leaning closer. "Do you think someone tried to poison her?" The word hung in the air between them, heavy and ominous. Lisa's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to meet Maria's gaze. "I don't want to jump to conclusions," she said carefully, "but whatever happened wasn't natural. If there's even a chance she was poisoned, someone needs to know." Before Maria could respond, the door to the break room opened, and Dr. Henry Walker stepped inside. His expression was serious, his hands shoved into the pockets of his coat. "I thought I might find you here," he said, his eyes landing on Lisa. "We need to talk." Lisa straightened, her pulse quickening. "What's going on? How's Irene?" Dr. Walker sat down, glancing briefly at the plastic bag on the table before speaking. "She's stable for now," he said, "but her vitals are weak, and the symptoms she presented don't match anything routine. The hospital is running tests, but they suspect some kind of toxin." Lisa exchanged a glance with Maria, her suspicions hardening into certainty. "Do they know what kind of toxin?" she asked. "Not yet," Dr. Walker replied. "It could take time to get definitive results, but the initial signs are consistent with certain alkaloid compounds, substances often found in plant-based poisons." Lisa's mind raced. Alkaloid compounds. The term sounded familiar, though she couldn't immediately place it. "And the hospital is sure this wasn't an allergic reaction or something accidental?" she pressed. Dr. Walker shook his head. "It doesn't look accidental, no. But we can't rule anything out until we have more information." He paused, studying Lisa intently. "You seem to have a lot on your mind. Do you know something I don't?" Lisa hesitated, weighing her words carefully. "I don't know for sure," she admitted. "But I've noticed things tonight, details that don't add up. The champagne, for one. David brought it himself, and the bottle seal looked tampered with. And there's this." She gestured to the plastic bag. "Residue from where the bottle was stored. It's sticky, almost like something spilled or leaked." Dr. Walker frowned, leaning forward to inspect the bag more closely. "May I?" he asked, and when Lisa nodded, he picked up the bag and turned it over in his hands. "Interesting," he murmured. "This could be something." Lisa felt a surge of hope. "If we test it, could it help determine what happened to Irene?" "Possibly," Dr. Walker said, though his tone was cautious. "But we'll need to be discreet. David's influence could complicate things if he catches wind of an investigation." Lisa's jaw tightened. She had already seen how easily David manipulated situations to his advantage. But she wasn't going to let that stop her. "Then we'll be careful," she said firmly. "Whatever it takes, we have to find the truth." Dr. Walker nodded, and Maria reached out to place a hand on Lisa's arm. "We're in this together," Maria said, her voice steady. "Let's do it right." Lisa looked between the two of them, her resolve solidifying. She didn't know where this would lead, but she knew one thing for sure. The answers were out there, and she wasn't going to stop until she found them. Dr. Walker leaned back in his chair, deep in thought, as the weight of their conversation settled over the room. "If we're going to do this, we'll need to handle it carefully," he said. "David Montgomery isn't just anyone. He has resources, connections. He could make this disappear if he wanted to." Lisa nodded, her jaw tightening. "That's exactly why we can't let it slide. If he's behind this, someone has to hold him accountable." Maria hesitated before speaking. "What's our next step, then? If you're right, and something happened to that champagne, how do we prove it?" Dr. Walker placed the plastic bag on the table, his gaze steady. "The residue should be tested," he said. "I know someone at the hospital lab who might be able to run it discreetly. It's not much to go on, but it's a start." "Do you think you can trust them?" Lisa asked. The thought of the evidence falling into the wrong hands made her stomach churn. Dr. Walker nodded. "Yes, but I'll have to be careful. If David catches wind of this, he'll push back hard." Lisa glanced toward the doorway, as though expecting David to burst in at any moment. "He's already suspicious of me," she said. "When he saw me looking at the champagne, he made a point of taking the bottle. He's trying to control the narrative." Maria's expression darkened. "That's not surprising. He's the kind of man who doesn't like loose ends." Dr. Walker tapped the table lightly, drawing their attention. "Then let's not give him any reason to suspect what we're doing," he said. "Lisa, I'll take the residue and get it tested, but you need to be careful. If David thinks you're prying, he won't hesitate to shut you down." Lisa straightened, her determination hardening. "I'll be careful," she said, "but I'm not backing off. If he's hiding something, I'll find it." Dr. Walker stood, slipping the plastic bag into his coat pocket. "I'll contact my colleague tonight," he said. "I'll keep you updated on what I find." As he left the room, Lisa turned to Maria. "I need to learn more about alkaloids," she said. "What kind of toxins fit that description? If I can connect the dots, I might be able to piece together what he used." Maria frowned, her brow furrowed in thought. "I'm not an expert, but alkaloids can come from certain plants. Belladonna, aconite, things like that. They're potent and can be deadly in small amounts." Lisa filed the information away, her mind racing. "If David used something like that, it wasn't random," she said. "He planned this." Maria nodded grimly. The way he handled that champagne, it wasn't just a gift. He was deliberate. Lisa's stomach churned at the thought. Irene's collapse had been horrifying enough, but the idea that her husband might have orchestrated it was even worse. "Irene deserves to know the truth," she said softly. "And if David is responsible, he can't get away with it." Maria placed a reassuring hand on Lisa's shoulder. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "But be careful. He's not the kind of man who plays fair." Lisa nodded, her resolve unwavering. She couldn't turn back now. Irene's life, and the truth, depended on her. As the night wore on, Lisa returned to the dining area, her mind buzzing with possibilities. The restaurant had quieted, the last of the diners finishing their meals or departing. She scanned the room, her eyes falling on the table where Irene and David had sat earlier. It was spotless now, cleared of all evidence that anything had gone wrong. Yet the memory of the night lingered, heavy and unresolved. Lisa's gaze drifted to the window, where the Charleston shoreline stretched into the darkness. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing. She wasn't done. Not yet. The truth was within reach, and she would find it, no matter the cost. The following morning, Lisa found herself standing outside the hospital, the early sunlight casting long shadows across the parking lot. She clutched her phone tightly, debating whether to go inside. Irene had been admitted overnight, and though Lisa wasn't family, her concern had driven her here. She felt a deep sense of responsibility, not just as someone who had witnessed the events of the previous evening, but as a person who couldn't turn a blind eye to what was happening. Before she could make a decision, her phone buzzed in her hand. The screen lit up with a message from Dr. Walker. "I'm inside. Meet me by the nurses' station on the second floor." Taking a deep breath, Lisa pushed through the glass doors and stepped into the hospital's cool, sterile air. The hum of activity was steady, but not frantic, and the scent of antiseptic lingered faintly in the air. She followed the signs to the elevators, her mind racing with questions. Had the tests revealed anything definitive? And if so, what would it mean for Irene? And for David? When the elevator doors slid open on the second floor, Lisa spotted Dr. Walker immediately. He stood near the nurses' station, his expression serious as he scanned a clipboard. He looked up as she approached, nodding in acknowledgement. "Thanks for coming," he said, gesturing for her to follow him down the hall. "Irene's condition has stabilized, but the results from the toxicology screen confirm what we suspected." Lisa's heart skipped a beat. A toxin? She asked, her voice low but urgent. Dr. Walker nodded grimly. Yes, they found traces of aconitine in her system. It's a highly toxic alkaloid found in certain plants like monkshood or wolfsbane. The amount in her blood was low enough to avoid fatal consequences, but it was enough to cause her symptoms. Lisa frowned, her mind racing to process the information. Aconitine? That's not something you accidentally ingest, she said. It had to have been deliberate. Dr. Walker glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard before speaking. That's my assessment as well, he said. But proving intent will be difficult, especially without direct evidence linking the toxin to a source. They stopped in front of Irene's room, where a large window allowed Lisa to see inside. Irene lay in the hospital bed, her face pale but calm. An IV drip hung beside her, delivering fluids and medication. She appeared to be sleeping, her chest rising and falling steadily. Lisa felt a pang of relief at the sight of her, but it was quickly overshadowed by a renewed sense of urgency. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Dr. Walker crossed his arms, his expression thoughtful. "The hospital has reported the findings to the authorities, but it could take time for them to act. In the meantime, we need to tread carefully. If David is involved, and I believe he is, he'll do everything in his power to cover his tracks." Lisa nodded, her jaw tightening. "Then we can't wait for someone else to solve this. If there's evidence, we have to find it ourselves." Dr. Walker hesitated, then sighed. "You're right," he said. "But we need to be methodical. We can't afford mistakes." Lisa's gaze shifted back to Irene, determination hardening in her chest. She wasn't going to let this go, not when the truth was so close. Lisa tore her eyes away from Irene and looked back at Dr. Walker. "What about the champagne bottle?" she asked. "David took it last night, but if that's the source of the toxin, it could still hold evidence." Dr. Walker nodded, his expression grim. "If the bottle contained traces of aconitine, it might still be detectable, but getting access to it will be tricky. David isn't going to hand it over willingly." Lisa crossed her arms, her frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "He's careful, but he's not untouchable. If we can't get the bottle, maybe there's something else. Maria said he handed it to her directly when they arrived. What if he left fingerprints or residue when he handled it?" "That's possible, Doctor," Walker said, his tone thoughtful. "If Maria can corroborate that she received the bottle directly from him, it strengthens the timeline. Combined with the toxicology results, it could create a clearer picture." Lisa leaned against the wall, her mind racing. Maria's already uneasy about all of this. She's willing to talk, but she's worried about the risks. Dr. Walker placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice calm but firm. "She's not wrong to be cautious. If David feels cornered, he could retaliate in ways we can't predict. You need to think carefully about your next steps." Lisa met his gaze, her determination unwavering. "I know the risks, but Irene doesn't deserve to suffer in silence. If we don't act, no one will." Before Dr. Walker could respond, a soft voice interrupted them. "Lisa?" They turned to see Irene awake, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but filled with recognition. Her voice was weak, barely above a whisper, but the sight of her awake brought a rush of relief to Lisa's chest. "Irene," Lisa said, stepping closer to the glass window. "You're awake." Irene managed a faint smile, though her face remained pale. "What happened?" she asked, her words slow and deliberate. Dr. Walker stepped forward, his tone gentle. "You collapsed at the restaurant last night," he explained. "We brought you here, and the hospital found a toxin in your system. You're stable now, but you need rest." Irene's brows knitted together, confusion clouding her expression. "A toxin? How?" Her voice trailed off, and she seemed to struggle with the weight of the revelation. Lisa hesitated before speaking. "Irene, do you remember drinking anything unusual last night? The champagne, maybe?" Irene's eyes widened slightly, and she nodded. "David insisted. He said it was special for our anniversary." Her gaze faltered, a shadow of doubt creeping into her expression. "He poured it for me himself." Lisa exchanged a glance with Dr. Walker, her suspicions all but confirmed. "Irene," Lisa said gently, "we're trying to piece together what happened. If there's anything you remember, anything at all, it could help." Irene's face tightened, and she looked away, her voice barely audible. "I don't know. He was so insistent, but it didn't feel right. I thought maybe I was imagining it." Dr. Walker stepped forward, his voice reassuring. "You're safe now, and we'll figure this out. But for now, focus on recovering." Irene nodded weakly, her eyelids drooping as exhaustion overtook her. Lisa watched as she drifted back to sleep, her heart heavy with both relief and a renewed sense of purpose. As they stepped away from the room, Lisa turned to Dr. Walker. "She remembers enough to point us in the right direction," she said. "David poured her drink. That's a start." Dr. Walker nodded. "It's enough to keep digging. But Lisa, be careful. If David realizes Irene is starting to remember, he won't sit idly by." Lisa's jaw tightened, her resolve hardening. "Let him try. If he thinks he can scare me off, he's in for a surprise." With that, Lisa turned and headed for the hospital exit, her mind already working through the next steps. David Montgomery had underestimated her once, but she wasn't about to let him win. Not this time. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Charleston's cobblestone streets as Lisa sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The weight of the previous night and the revelations at the hospital pressed heavily on her mind. Irene's weak acknowledgement that David had poured the champagne himself felt like the missing piece in a puzzle she was only beginning to assemble. But knowing wasn't enough. She needed solid proof. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Maria. "I've been thinking about what you said. Meet me at the restaurant after closing. I might have something." Lisa exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and anticipation coursing through her. Maria had been hesitant the night before, but it seemed she was ready to talk. If Maria had noticed anything else about the champagne or David's behavior, it could be the break Lisa desperately needed. By the time Lisa arrived at the restaurant, the last diners had already left, and the staff were beginning to clean up. The warm glow of the chandeliers was subdued now, casting softer light across the nearly empty space. Maria stood near the bar, her arms crossed as she waited for Lisa. "Thanks for meeting me," Lisa said, walking over. "What's on your mind?" Maria glanced around to ensure they were alone before speaking. "I've been replaying last night over and over," she said. "There was something strange about the way David handled that champagne. He was meticulous, too careful, almost like he didn't want anyone else to touch it." Lisa's brow furrowed. "You mentioned he handed it to you directly when they arrived. Did he say anything unusual?" Maria nodded slowly. "He made a point of telling me it was expensive, special for their anniversary. He even joked that no one else in Charleston could afford a bottle like that. At the time, I thought he was just showing off, but now—" She hesitated, her voice dropping. "Now I wonder if it was something else." Lisa leaned in, her mind racing. "Did you notice anything odd about the bottle itself? Anything that stood out?" Maria hesitated, then nodded again. "When I chilled it, I noticed the seal wasn't as tight as it should have been. It looked intact, but when I opened the fridge later, there was a faint smell, something bitter, almost chemical. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now it feels important." Lisa's stomach churned at the description. "That could be it," she said. If David tampered with the bottle, that smell might have been from whatever he added. Maria glanced at the door leading to the kitchen, her voice lowering further. I didn't say anything before, but I kept the cork. I don't know why. I guess it was instinct. I thought it might be useful. Lisa's heart raced as Maria reached into her apron and pulled out a small plastic bag containing the cork. The faint residue around the edges was barely visible, but it was enough to send a jolt of hope through Lisa. This could be the physical evidence she needed. This is huge, Lisa said, her voice firm. If we can get this tested, it might link directly to the toxin in Irene's system. Maria nodded, though her expression remained tense. What are you going to do next? She asked. Lisa glanced at the cork, her mind already working through the possibilities. We get it to Dr. Walker, she said. He'll know how to handle this without tipping off David. Maria's hand lingered on the bar as she watched Lisa carefully place the bag in her purse. Be careful, Lisa, she said softly. David doesn't strike me as the kind of man who lets loose ends go unnoticed. Lisa gave a small nod, her resolve unwavering. Neither am I, she said. This ends here. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from an unknown number. You're making a mistake. Leave it alone. Lisa stared at the screen, her blood running cold. The words were simple but chilling, and she knew exactly who they were from. David wasn't just watching, he was warning her. Lisa's grip tightened around her phone as she reread the message, her heart pounding in her chest. The threat was clear, but it only fueled her determination. If David thought intimidation would scare her off, he was sorely mistaken. She tucked her phone back into her pocket and pushed through the restaurant doors into the cool evening air. The streets were quiet, and the faint sound of waves crashing against the shore in the distance only amplified her sense of unease. As she walked toward her car, Lisa's mind raced. The cork Maria had saved could be the key to unraveling David's plan, but getting it tested discreetly would be critical. If David already knew she was digging into his actions, every step from here on out would have to be calculated. She reached her car and slid into the driver's seat, locking the doors behind her. Pulling out her phone, she dialed Dr. Walker. The call connected after 2 rings. Lisa, his voice came through, calm but alert. What's going on? I have something, Lisa said, keeping her voice low despite the empty street. Maria found the cork from the champagne bottle. There's residue on it. It could be linked to the toxin in Irene's system. There was a pause before Dr. Walker spoke again. That's significant, he said. If the cork has traces of aconitine, it could be the proof we need. But testing it will be tricky. If we send it to the wrong lab, David might catch wind of it. I figured you'd say that, Lisa replied. Do you trust the hospital's lab, or do we need to go elsewhere? I have someone in mind, Dr. Walker said after a moment. A colleague at a private facility. They can run the tests without raising any red flags, but we need to move quickly. If David knows what you're holding, he won't sit idly by. Lisa exhaled slowly, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. I got a message just now, a warning to stop digging. I'm pretty sure it's from him. Dr. Walker's tone hardened. Then you're on his radar. That means we don't have much time. Can you meet me at my office? I'll arrange for the sample to be tested. Lisa glanced in her rearview mirror, scanning the empty street behind her. I'm on my way, she said, starting the engine. The drive to Dr. Walker's office felt longer than it was, every shadow and passing car amplifying her paranoia. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, even though the streets appeared empty. By the time she pulled into the parking lot, her nerves were on edge. Dr. Walker was waiting for her just inside the building, the faint glow of fluorescent lights illuminating his concerned expression. Lisa handed him the plastic bag containing the cork, and he examined it carefully. This is good, he said, his voice steady. It's more than we had before. If this tests positive for aconitine, it strengthens the case against David. Lisa nodded, though her unease hadn't lessened. What's our next move? She asked. I'll deliver this to my colleague tonight, Dr. Walker replied. It'll take some time for the results, but once we have them, we'll have a clearer picture. In the meantime, you need to lay low. Don't give David any reason to come after you directly. Lisa's jaw tightened. I'm not going to stop, Doctor. Walker, if he thinks he can scare me, he's wrong. Dr. Walker placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I know you won't stop, Lisa, but don't underestimate him. People like David Montgomery don't play fair. Lisa nodded, determination burning in her chest. Neither do I, she said quietly. As she left the office and headed back to her car, Lisa's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Maria. Lisa, Maria's voice was shaky. I just got a call from someone. I think it was David. He asked if I'd spoken to you about the champagne. Lisa's stomach dropped. What did you say? I told him nothing, Maria said quickly. But he sounded angry. Be careful, Lisa. I think he knows we're onto him. Lisa closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Thanks for letting me know, she said. I'll handle it. Ending the call, Lisa leaned back in her seat, her mind racing. David was closing in, but she wasn't backing down. The truth was within reach, and she was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. Lisa woke up to a grey, overcast sky and the persistent hum of rain tapping against her window. The tension from the night before lingered, curling around her chest like a weight that refused to lift. She sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, and checked her phone. No new messages, no calls. The silence was deafening, and it only heightened her sense of urgency. As she got ready for the day, her mind churned with possibilities. David was clearly aware of her suspicions now, and he wasn't hiding his displeasure. If Maria's call from the night before was any indication, he was beginning to apply pressure. Lisa had to stay one step ahead, but with limited resources and time, she knew the window for action was closing fast. She headed out, her destination clear in her mind. Irene. Lisa had avoided pressing her too hard at the hospital, but Irene's memories of the champagne and David's insistence on her drinking it were vital. If Irene could recall more, it might be enough to confront David with a timeline he couldn't dispute. When Lisa arrived at the hospital, she found Dr. Walker in the hallway near Irene's room. He greeted her with a nod, his expression serious. I was hoping you'd come, he said. Irene's condition is improving, but she's still weak. I think she's ready to talk, though. Lisa glanced toward the door. Does she remember anything else? Anything specific about David's behavior? Dr. Walker hesitated. She hasn't said much since last night, but I think if you approach her carefully, she might open up. She trusts you. Lisa nodded, steeling herself before stepping into the room. Irene was sitting up in bed, her hair loosely framing her face, her complexion still pale, but noticeably better than the night before. Her eyes lit up faintly when she saw Lisa. Lisa, Irene said softly, her voice still hoarse. Thank you for coming. Irene, Lisa replied, pulling a chair closer to the bed. How are you feeling? Irene offered a faint smile. Better, I think. Still a little shaky, but better. Lisa leaned forward, her voice gentle but deliberate. I know this is hard, but I need to ask you something. Last night, you mentioned that David poured the champagne for you. Do you remember anything else about that moment? Anything that seemed unusual? Irene's expression tightened, and she looked down at her hands. I remember the way he looked at me, she said quietly. It wasn't loving or excited, like I thought it would be for an anniversary. It was something else. Cold, detached. Lisa's chest tightened at Irene's words, but she kept her voice steady. "Did he say anything when he poured the drink, or before you took a sip?" Irene closed her eyes briefly, as though searching her memory. "He said something about celebrating our future together," she murmured, but it felt wrong, like he was trying to convince himself. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. David's calculated demeanor was becoming more apparent with every detail Irene shared. "Irene, I know this is painful, but if you remember anything else, even the smallest thing, it could help us figure out what happened." Irene looked at Lisa, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "Do you think he—" Her voice faltered, but the unspoken question hung in the air between them. Lisa reached for Irene's hand, squeezing it gently. "We're going to find the truth," she said firmly. "And you're not alone in this." Irene nodded, her grip tightening briefly around Lisa's hand. Though she didn't say it, Lisa could see the flicker of strength returning to her. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Lisa gave Irene's hand one final squeeze before stepping out into the hallway, her mind racing with Irene's words. Each detail was another piece of the puzzle, and it painted a picture that was becoming harder to ignore. David wasn't just manipulative, he was dangerous. She found Dr. Walker waiting just outside the door, his expression expectant. "She remembers more," Lisa said quietly. The way he looked at her, the things he said, it all felt calculated. Cold Dr. Walker nodded, his face grim. "It aligns with what we've suspected. Did she mention anything concrete we can use?" "Not yet," Lisa admitted, frustration creeping into her voice. "But her memory is coming back. I think if we give her time, more will surface." Dr. Walker glanced down the hall, his tone lowering. "We may not have much time. I delivered the cork sample to my colleague last night. They're running the tests now, but if David finds out we have physical evidence, he'll act." Lisa's phone buzzed in her pocket, cutting him off. She pulled it out, her stomach tightening at the sight of another unknown number. Reluctantly, she answered. "Hello." A low, measured voice came through the line, unmistakably David's. "You're persistent, I'll give you that. But you're playing a dangerous game, Lisa. It's time to stop." Her pulse quickened, but she forced her voice to stay steady. "I'm not scared of you, David. The truth will come out." A faint chuckle echoed through the line. "Truth? That's a fragile thing, easily manipulated. Walk away now, and you'll save yourself a lot of trouble." The line went dead, leaving Lisa gripping the phone tightly. She looked up at Dr. Walker, her resolve hardening. "He knows. He's trying to scare me." "Then we can't back down," Dr. Walker said firmly. "The tests will give us what we need. Until then, we need to stay vigilant." Lisa nodded, a fire igniting in her chest. David could try to intimidate her all he wanted, but she wasn't backing down, not when Irene's life and the truth were at stake. Lisa sat in the quiet corner of a cafe across from the hospital, a steaming cup of coffee untouched in front of her. The conversation with David replayed in her mind, each word laced with menace. He was escalating his attempts to intimidate her, but it only solidified her resolve. The stakes were higher now, and she needed to stay focused. Her phone buzzed on the table, and she quickly picked it up. It was a text from Dr. Walker. "The preliminary results are in. We need to meet." Without hesitation, Lisa grabbed her things and headed out, her pace quick despite the drizzle that had begun to fall. Within minutes, she was back at the hospital, making her way to Dr. Walker's office. He was waiting for her, a folder in hand and a grim expression on his face. "These just came through," he said, handing her the folder. "The cork tested positive for traces of aconitine, the same toxin found in Irene's system. There's no doubt now, it was in the champagne." Lisa's stomach tightened as she flipped through the report. The evidence was damning and the connection was clear. "This is it," she said quietly. "This proves Irene didn't just get sick. Someone did this to her." Dr. Walker nodded. "It's strong evidence, but we need to be cautious. Without direct proof tying David to the tampering, he could argue it was accidental or someone else's doing." Lisa clenched her jaw, her frustration mounting. "We know he brought the champagne. Maria saw him handle it personally. Irene remembers him insisting she drink it. That's not a coincidence." "No, it's not," Dr. Walker agreed. "But for now, we need to protect this evidence. If David gets wind of it, he'll find a way to discredit it, or worse, make it disappear." Lisa stared at the folder in her hands, the weight of responsibility settling over her. This was the proof they needed, but it wasn't enough on its own. They had to act strategically, or David's power and influence would crush their case before it could gain traction. "What about Irene?" Lisa asked. "If she remembers more, it could strengthen the case against him." Dr. Walker hesitated. "She's still fragile. Pushing her too hard could set back her recovery. But if she's willing, her testimony could be crucial." Lisa nodded, determination sparking in her chest. "I'll talk to her. She deserves to know we're getting closer to the truth." Dr. Walker placed a hand on her shoulder. "Be careful, Lisa. David won't stop at threats if he feels cornered." Lisa's eyes narrowed, her resolve unwavering. "Neither will I," she said. With the folder clutched tightly in her hands, Lisa made her way to Irene's hospital room. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the evidence pressing on her. When she reached the door, she paused, taking a deep breath to steady herself before knocking softly and stepping inside. Irene looked up, her pale face softening when she saw Lisa. "You're back," she said, her voice faint but steady. "Did you find anything?" Lisa nodded, pulling the chair closer to Irene's bedside. "We did," she said gently. Dr. Walker had the cork from the champagne bottle tested. "It was tampered with, Irene. The toxin they found in your system, aconitine, it was in the champagne." Irene's expression shifted from confusion to realization, her hands clutching the blanket tightly. "David brought that bottle," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He poured it. He told me it was special, for us." Lisa reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Irene's arm. "I know this is hard, but it's important. Do you remember anything else about the night? Anything he said or did that seemed off?" Irene hesitated, her brow furrowing as she struggled to piece together her fragmented memories. "He kept watching me," she said finally. "Every time I took a sip, he seemed satisfied, like he was waiting for something." Lisa's stomach churned at the thought. "Irene, do you think he intended to harm you?" Irene's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded slowly. "I don't want to believe it," she said, her voice breaking. "But I've been feeling it for a while, like I'm just a piece of his plan. Everything he does is so calculated." Lisa leaned closer, her tone soft but firm. "You're not just a piece, Irene. You're a person who deserves safety and respect. Whatever David planned, we're going to stop him. But I need your help. If you're ready, we can take this evidence to the authorities." Irene hesitated, the fear in her eyes battling with a growing resolve. "What if he finds out?" she whispered. "He won't stop until he wins." Lisa tightened her grip on Irene's arm. "Then we won't stop either," she said, her voice steady. "You're not alone in this, Irene. We'll protect you." Irene nodded slowly, her expression hardening. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let's do it." Lisa felt a surge of relief and determination. They had the evidence, and now they had Irene's testimony. It wasn't just about finding the truth anymore. It was about making sure David Montgomery answered for what he'd done. Lisa sat across from Caroline Prescott, Irene's younger sister, in a small meeting room at a law office downtown. Caroline's sharp eyes scanned the folder Lisa had placed on the table between them, her expression growing more serious with every passing second. The room was quiet except for the faint rustle of papers as Caroline flipped through the toxicology report, the lab results, and the photos Lisa had collected. "This is solid," Caroline said finally, closing the folder and looking up. "The test results, the timeline, the witnesses, it all points to deliberate poisoning. If this goes to court, it could be damning." Lisa exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "But is it enough?" she asked. "David has resources, connections. He'll fight this with everything he has." Caroline leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed. "It's enough to get the authorities involved. The toxicology report and the evidence from the champagne cork are strong. Irene's testimony adds weight, especially if she's willing to take a stand." Lisa glanced at Irene, who sat quietly beside her. Despite her frail appearance, there was a newfound resolve in her eyes. "I'll do it," Irene said softly but firmly. "I won't let him get away with this." Caroline nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Good. But we need to be strategic. If David gets wind of this, he'll try to undermine the case before it gains traction. We have to make sure every piece of evidence is secured and submitted through the proper channels." "What about protection for Irene?" Lisa asked, her voice steady. "If David knows she's cooperating, he won't hesitate to retaliate." Caroline's jaw tightened. "I've already contacted a security firm. They'll assign someone to Irene around the clock once we file the complaint. But we need to act fast. The longer we wait, the more time David has to cover his tracks." Lisa nodded, her mind racing. Every step had to be deliberate, every move calculated. "When do we start?" Caroline pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts. "I'll make the call now. Once the authorities are involved, it'll be out of David's hands, for the most part. But be prepared. He won't go down without a fight." As Caroline stepped out of the room to make the call, Lisa turned to Irene. "Are you sure about this?" she asked gently. "It's not going to be easy." Irene met Lisa's gaze, her voice steady. "He tried to control me for years. He almost killed me. I'm done being afraid." Lisa felt a surge of admiration for Irene's courage. She reached across the table, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "You're stronger than you think," she said. "We'll get through this together." Minutes later, Caroline returned, her expression resolute. "It's done," she said. "The authorities will want to meet with Irene first to document her testimony. After that, they'll take the evidence and launch an official investigation." Lisa felt a flicker of relief. The wheels were in motion now, and there was no turning back. But she knew this was only the beginning. David Montgomery wouldn't go down easily, and the fight ahead would test all of them. The next morning, Lisa accompanied Irene to the police station for her meeting with the detectives assigned to the case. The atmosphere was tense, the quiet hum of activity in the building only amplifying Irene's nervousness. Lisa stayed close by, offering quiet encouragement as they were led to a small interview room. Caroline had arranged for an attorney to be present, ensuring Irene had all the support she needed. Detective Harper, a seasoned investigator with a calm demeanor, greeted them as they sat down. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Montgomery," he said, his voice steady. "I understand this must be difficult, but your testimony is critical to ensuring we move forward effectively." Irene nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I'll do my best," she said softly. The interview began with basic questions about her relationship with David, leading into the events of the night at the restaurant. Irene recounted everything she could remember: how David had insisted on bringing the champagne, how he poured it with an unsettling precision, and how she felt immediately uneasy after drinking it. As Irene spoke, Lisa watched Detective Harper's expression carefully. He remained neutral but attentive, taking detailed notes as Irene described her collapse and the aftermath. When she hesitated, Lisa gave her an encouraging nod, silently urging her to continue. "He told me to keep drinking," Irene said at one point, her voice trembling slightly. "Even when I said I didn't feel right, he brushed it off. He made me think I was imagining it." Detective Harper leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Montgomery, did your husband ever say or do anything that indicated he planned to harm you?" Irene hesitated, the question hanging heavily in the air. Finally, she nodded. "It wasn't just that night," she said quietly. "For months he's been different, more controlling. He started talking about how everything would be easier if I just trusted him, if I let him handle things. Looking back, it feels like he was preparing for this." Detective Harper exchanged a glance with his partner, then turned back to Irene. "Your testimony is important, and it aligns with the evidence we've seen so far," he said. "We'll move forward with the investigation immediately, but you need to be prepared. Your husband will likely respond aggressively when he finds out." Irene's jaw tightened, and for the first time since the interview began, a spark of defiance flashed in her eyes. "Let him," she said firmly. "I'm done being his victim." Lisa couldn't help but feel a swell of pride at Irene's strength. As the interview concluded, the detectives assured them that the case would be handled with the utmost care and that Irene's safety was their priority. When they stepped out into the cool morning air, Lisa turned to Irene. "You did it," she said, her voice warm. "That took incredible courage." Irene offered a small smile, the weight of her fear slowly lifting. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "But it's not over, is it?" Lisa shook her head. "No," she said. "This is just the beginning. But we're in this together, and we're going to see it through." As they headed to the car, Lisa's phone buzzed. It was a message from Caroline. "I just heard from the security team. Irene's protection detail is in place. Let's regroup later to discuss next steps." Lisa felt a surge of relief. They were finally making progress, and with every step, David's control over the situation weakened. But she knew the real battle was just beginning, and David Montgomery wouldn't give up without a fight. The following days passed in a blur of activity. Irene's testimony had been formally filed, and the investigation into David's actions was officially underway. Lisa worked tirelessly with Caroline, helping to compile every scrap of evidence they had collected. Each document, photo, and statement was meticulously organized, creating a timeline that painted a clear picture of David's calculated actions. Despite the progress, the tension was palpable. David hadn't made any overt moves since his warning to Lisa, but the silence was almost more unnerving. It felt like the calm before a storm, and Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for the right moment to strike. Late one evening, Lisa sat in Caroline's office, poring over a copy of the toxicology report. Across the table, Caroline was on the phone with a contact at the district attorney's office, discussing the next steps for the case. The room was dimly lit, the only sound the faint hum of conversation and the occasional shuffle of papers. As Caroline ended the call, she turned to Lisa, her expression serious. "The DA is confident this case has legs," she said. "But they're going to need more, something that ties David directly to the toxin." Lisa frowned, leaning back in her chair. "We have the cork, the timeline, and Irene's testimony. What else could they possibly need?" Caroline sighed. "They want concrete proof, something indisputable, a physical connection between David and the aconitine. Without it, his defense team could argue the champagne was tampered with after he handed it off." Lisa's frustration bubbled to the surface, but she kept her voice calm. "Then we need to find that connection. Maria said the seal on the champagne bottle looked off. If David handled it before bringing it to the restaurant, there might still be fingerprints or residue on the bottle. Caroline nodded thoughtfully. It's possible, but the bottle's gone. David took it with him that night. Maybe, Lisa said, an idea sparking in her mind. But what if he didn't get rid of it? Someone as arrogant as David might have kept it, thinking no one could ever tie it to him. Caroline raised an eyebrow. You're suggesting we search his property? That's risky, Lisa. Without a warrant, anything we find won't hold up in court. Lisa hesitated, weighing the risks. I'm not saying we break in, but if we can find someone close to him, someone who might have access to his home or office, they could help us locate it. Caroline's expression remained cautious. That's a big if. Do you have anyone in mind? Lisa thought for a moment, then nodded. David has an assistant, Matthew. I've seen him at the restaurant a few times. He's quiet, but he seems loyal. If we can convince him that helping us is the right thing to do, he might be willing to cooperate. Caroline exhaled slowly, considering the idea. It's a long shot, she said, but it might be our only option. I'll do some digging on Matthew and see if there's a way to approach him. Lisa leaned forward, determination burning in her chest. If we can get to him, we might have a chance to finally take David down. The following morning, Lisa and Caroline met at a small cafe near David's office building. Caroline had spent the night researching Matthew, David's assistant, and had uncovered just enough to make him a potential ally. The young man was relatively new to his position, having joined David's staff less than a year ago, and he seemed to keep a low profile. No social media presence, no public connections outside of work. That anonymity could work to their advantage, but it also meant they would have to tread carefully. Lisa sipped her coffee, her mind racing as Caroline reviewed the notes she'd compiled. He's got a clean record, Caroline said, tapping her tablet. No major debts, no scandals, nothing that suggests he'd be easy to leverage. If we're going to approach him, it has to be on principle. Lisa nodded, her gaze fixed on the office building across the street. If he's working closely with David, he might have seen or heard something that didn't sit right with him. We need to make him realize he could be complicit if he stays silent. Caroline glanced at Lisa, her expression firm. We also need to be ready for him to say no. If he's loyal to David, this could backfire. Lisa tightened her grip on her coffee cup, her resolve hardening. Then we'll have to be convincing. I'm not leaving without trying. They waited until mid-morning, watching the building for signs of Matthew's arrival. When Lisa finally spotted him, a tall, slender man with neatly combed hair and a nervous energy about him, she stood, ready to make her move. Caroline stayed behind, observing from a distance in case things went awry. Lisa crossed the street, catching up to Matthew as he approached the building's entrance. "Matthew!" she called, her tone calm but assertive. He turned, his expression cautious but curious. "Yes?" Lisa offered a small, disarming smile. "My name is Lisa Carter. I work at the restaurant where David and Irene dined the night she got sick. Can I have a moment of your time?" Matthew hesitated, his gaze darting around as if checking to see if anyone was watching. "I'm not sure I should be talking to you," he said. "Mr. Montgomery doesn't like his staff getting involved in personal matters." "I understand," Lisa said, her voice gentle but firm. "But this isn't just a personal matter. Irene's life was put in danger, and I think you know something about it. I'm not here to accuse you of anything. I just want to understand what happened." Matthew glanced toward the entrance, his shoulders tense. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Lisa stepped closer, lowering her voice. "David is under investigation, Matthew. If you know something and you keep quiet, it could come back on you. But if you help us now, you could make a difference, for Irene and for yourself." Matthew's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment Lisa thought he might turn and walk away. But then he exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping. "I can't talk here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Meet me at the coffee shop on 5th in an hour." Lisa nodded, relief washing over her. "Thank you, Matthew. You're doing the right thing." As he disappeared into the building, Lisa returned to Caroline, who was already gathering her things. "He agreed to meet," Lisa said. "We might finally have a way in." Caroline gave a small nod, her expression cautiously optimistic. "Let's hope he doesn't change his mind. This could be the break we need." The clock was ticking, and every step brought them closer to uncovering the truth. Lisa could only hope that Matthew's conscience was strong enough to outweigh his fear of David. Lisa sat at a corner table in the coffee shop on 5th Street, her eyes fixed on the entrance. The faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but she barely noticed. Her mind was focused entirely on Matthew. Would he show up? And if he did, would he bring answers or more questions? The door chimed as it opened, and Lisa's pulse quickened. Matthew stepped inside, his eyes darting nervously around the room until they landed on her. She raised a hand in greeting, and after a brief hesitation, he made his way over to her table. "Thanks for coming," Lisa said, as he slid into the seat across from her. His face was tense, his movements jittery, but he was here, and that was a start. Matthew glanced around again before leaning in slightly. "I shouldn't be doing this," he said, his voice low. "If David finds out—" "He won't," Lisa assured him. "This stays between us. But you need to understand, Matthew, this isn't just about David. It's about Irene and what happened to her. She nearly died." Matthew's jaw tightened, and he looked down at the table. "I know," he said quietly. "And I've been trying to convince myself that I didn't see what I saw. But it's been eating at me." Lisa's heart leapt. "What did you see?" Matthew hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "David had that bottle of champagne in his office a few days before the dinner," he said finally. "I didn't think much of it at first. It's not unusual for him to have expensive drinks around. But one night, I stayed late working on a report, and I saw him with it. He wasn't just looking at it, he was doing something to it." Lisa's breath caught. "What do you mean? What was he doing?" "He had a small vial," Matthew said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He poured something into the champagne bottle, then resealed it. When he noticed me watching, he acted like it was nothing, said he was adding a special touch for Irene's anniversary." Lisa leaned forward, her pulse racing. "You're sure about this? You saw him tamper with the bottle?" Matthew nodded, his face pale. "I didn't want to believe it, but yes, I saw it. And then he took the bottle with him when he left." Lisa felt a mix of relief and anger. This was the connection they needed, the proof that tied David directly to the poisoning. But it also meant Matthew was putting himself in danger by coming forward. "Matthew, this is huge," Lisa said, keeping her voice steady. "But it also means David will come after you if he finds out you've talked to me. Are you prepared for that?" Matthew swallowed hard, but he nodded. "I can't keep covering for him," he said. "I've seen too much, and I can't live with the guilt. But I need your help. If he finds out, I don't know what he'll do." Lisa reached across the table, her gaze steady. "You're doing the right thing, Matthew. We'll protect you. And with your statement, we can finally hold David accountable." Matthew exhaled slowly, as though a weight had been lifted. "Okay," he said. "What do we do now?" Lisa glanced toward the door, her resolve hardening. "We take this to Caroline and the authorities. It's time to end this." Lisa wasted no time. As soon as Matthew left the coffee shop, she called Caroline, her voice firm and urgent. "We have him," she said. "Matthew saw David tampering with the champagne. He's willing to testify." Caroline's sharp intake of breath was audible through the line. "That's the link we needed," she replied. But we need to act fast. If David even suspects Matthew is talking, he'll do everything in his power to discredit him, or worse. Lisa's grip on her phone tightened. Matthew knows the risk, but he's scared. We need to make sure he's protected. "I'm on it," Caroline said. "I'll contact the authorities and ensure they know this witness is key to the case. I'll also get the security firm to include Matthew in their protection detail." Lisa exhaled, relief mingling with her urgency. "Thank you. I'll meet you at your office to finalize everything." By the time Lisa arrived at Caroline's office, the wheels were already in motion. The authorities had been briefed, and arrangements were being made to secure both Irene and Matthew, while the investigation gained momentum. Caroline sat at her desk, her expression focused as she reviewed the case files one last time. "Matthew's testimony ties everything together," Caroline said, gesturing to the folder in front of her. "The toxicology report, Irene's testimony, the evidence from the champagne cork. Now we have a witness who saw David tampering with the bottle. It's a solid case." Lisa nodded, a flicker of hope breaking through her exhaustion. "It's enough to bring him down, but we have to be ready for his next move. He's not going to take this lying down." Caroline's jaw tightened. "I know. That's why I've contacted the DA's office to expedite the filing process. If we move quickly, we can secure a warrant before David has a chance to react." The room fell silent for a moment as the weight of their actions settled over them. They were on the brink of exposing David's crimes, but the stakes had never been higher. Lisa felt a renewed sense of determination. This wasn't just about justice for Irene. It was about ensuring David couldn't hurt anyone else. Caroline broke the silence, her voice steady. "The next step is critical. Once the warrant is issued, they'll search his properties. If the champagne bottle is still there, it'll seal the case." Lisa nodded, her heart pounding. "And if it's not?" Caroline's expression darkened. "Then we'll need to rely on the strength of the evidence we already have. Either way, David's time is running out." Lisa straightened, her resolve hardening. "Then let's make sure we don't waste a second." The day of reckoning arrived swiftly. The warrant to search David Montgomery's properties had been granted, and by early morning law enforcement descended on his estate. Lisa stood at a safe distance alongside Caroline and Irene, watching as officers moved methodically through the grand house. The tension was thick, each passing moment a mixture of hope and dread. They had built a strong case, but this search could be the final piece that cemented David's guilt, or left them scrambling to press charges without irrefutable physical evidence. Caroline's phone buzzed, and she quickly answered, stepping a few paces away. Lisa turned to Irene, who stood quietly, her gaze fixed on the house. "How are you holding up?" Lisa asked softly. "I don't know," Irene admitted, her voice wavering. "I thought I'd feel relief, but all I feel is empty. It's like the person I thought I knew never existed." Lisa placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's okay to feel that way. You're processing a betrayal on a level most people can't even imagine. But you're not alone. You've taken control of your life back, and that's something no one can take away from you." Irene nodded, her lips pressing into a faint, determined line. Before she could reply, Caroline returned, her face a mask of intensity. "They've found something," she said, "a hidden compartment in his study." The three of them hurried closer, though they stayed behind the boundary set by the officers. One of the detectives emerged from the house holding a sealed evidence bag. Inside was the champagne bottle, still intact, its label unmistakable. Lisa's breath caught as the officer confirmed its importance. "It matches the description," the detective said to his partner. "We'll have it sent for testing immediately." A wave of relief washed over Lisa, but she kept her expression steady. The battle wasn't over yet, But this discovery was a significant victory. She glanced at Irene, who was staring at the bottle with a mix of disbelief and vindication. As the evidence was secured and the search continued, the weight of the moment settled over all of them. David Montgomery, a man who had wielded power and control so effortlessly, now faced the very real prospect of losing everything. For Lisa, the thought brought a sense of justice, but also a sobering reminder of the cost. Hours later, they gathered in Caroline's office, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. News of David's arrest had already begun to spread, and the media was abuzz with speculation. Irene sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap as she processed the events of the day. "You did it," Lisa said gently, breaking the silence. "You stood up to him." Irene looked at her, tears brimming in her eyes. "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Caroline stepped forward, her voice steady and pragmatic. "The fight isn't over. The trial will be grueling, and David's team will do everything they can to deflect blame. But with the evidence we've gathered, and Matthew's testimony, we have a strong case." Irene nodded, her resolve firm. "I'm ready. I won't let him manipulate me anymore." Lisa exchanged a look with Caroline, both of them sensing the strength in Irene's words. It was clear that this wasn't just a legal battle, it was a reclamation of Irene's life, a chance for her to finally break free of the shadow David had cast over her. The courtroom was packed on the day of David Montgomery's trial, the tension palpable as the proceedings began. The prosecution laid out their case methodically, presenting the toxicology reports, the evidence from the champagne bottle, and Matthew's testimony about witnessing David tampering with the bottle. Each detail painted a damning picture of premeditated intent, a man willing to poison his wife to gain control over her wealth and life. Lisa sat beside Irene and Caroline, watching as the defense attempted to dismantle the case. David's attorneys were sharp, skilled at deflecting attention and casting doubt. They questioned Matthew's credibility, implying his account was motivated by resentment or coercion. They suggested the champagne could have been tampered with after David handed it over, seizing on any ambiguity to create reasonable doubt. But as the trial progressed, the strength of the evidence became undeniable. The lab results confirmed that the aconitine residue on the cork matched the toxin found in Irene's system. Matthew's account remained consistent under cross-examination, and Maria's testimony about the champagne's unusual seal added another layer of credibility. Then came the pivotal moment. Irene took the stand. Lisa watched as she walked to the witness box, her head held high despite the fear flickering in her eyes. As she began to speak, the courtroom fell silent. "I trusted my husband," Irene said, her voice steady but emotional. "I believed in him, even when he started to change. But over time, his control over me became suffocating. And that night at the restaurant, I knew something was wrong, but I ignored my instincts because I wanted to believe he cared." Her testimony was raw, honest, and heartbreaking. She described the night of her collapse in vivid detail, her words piercing the room. The jury was captivated, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and outrage. When the defense tried to rattle her, Irene held firm. "I'm here today because I survived," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "But I could have died, and I refuse to let that man walk away without facing the consequences of what he's done." As she stepped down from the stand, Lisa felt a surge of pride. Irene had faced her fears head-on, refusing to let David silence her any longer. It was a moment of triumph not just for Irene, but for everyone who had fought alongside her. The trial concluded with closing arguments, the prosecution driving home the overwhelming evidence against David. The defense scrambled to create doubt, but their efforts felt increasingly hollow. When the jury returned with a verdict, the tension in the room was electric. The foreperson stood, her voice steady as she announced, "We find the defendant, David Montgomery, guilty on all counts." A collective exhale swept through the room. Irene closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face as Lisa and Caroline embraced her. Justice had been served, and the weight of David's control was finally lifted. In the days that followed, Irene began to rebuild her life. She threw herself into her work with the Second Light Foundation, channeling her pain into a mission to help others escape abusive situations. Lisa and Caroline remained by her side, their bond stronger than ever after everything they had endured together. On a quiet evening, Irene returned to the restaurant where it all began. She sat at a table overlooking the ocean, the sound of waves soothing her spirit. Lisa joined her, a smile spreading across her face as she placed a glass of sparkling water on the table. "To new beginnings," Lisa said, raising her glass. Irene clinked hers gently against Lisa's, a sense of peace settling over her. "To freedom," she replied. The darkness that had once consumed her life was gone, replaced by a light she never thought she'd find again. Together, they had fought for the truth and won.